listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. You guys, it's a big day. Today we talk to the Today's Mama podcast's first dude. It's my friend Riley Jensen, who also happens to be a sports psychologist and is an encyclopedia of fascinating. He's worked with athletes and teams from high school to college to pro. You might wonder why I'd drag a sports psychologist onto the podcast. And it's because all of this mindset stuff applies to everything in life. So enjoy this episode, and when you're done, remember to subscribe to the podcast and give it all the likes and stars. We'll love you forever for it. Today we're talking to Riley Jensen, sports psychologist or mental performance coach. He's also my friend of many years. We worked together during the 2002 Olympics, creating and selling Olympic pins, like a green Jell-O pin, funeral potatoes, fry sauce. These are all very Utah things. We did a few school assemblies together. So Riley, I think it's time to get the band back together.
I think you're right. I'm hearing that they're bringing the Olympics back, so it sounds like we're probably going to have to do something like that again together.
Yeah, I think we should probably start selling Olympic pins again.
I'm not scared. I just want to be on the other end of the equation rather than selling it.
Yeah.
Right? The part that makes a lot of money.
Yeah, not the just out of college part where they forget to pay you your bonuses.
Exactly.
Well, before we jump into mental performance, can we talk about kids for a second?
Please.
In my little pre-interview form, which I told you, it's probably one of my favorite ones anyone has submitted. There was so many golden nuggets in there. But you said, I love my kids. I sometimes stare at them while they sleep and while they eat. Is that weird? And I'm telling you, it's not weird. Like, your kids are still little and cute, and mine are getting bigger and stinky and all of that stuff. And I still stare at them all the time. Like, on the last episode, we talked about how I stare at them when they walk into school. I stare at them when they eat their food. Like, I am constantly staring at my kids. So yeah, talk to me.
Well, you're already making me feel like I'm on Oprah because I'm going to get choked up about my kids. But man, is there anything greater? I mean, I am so tired. I have a 6-year-old named Alexis and a 4-year-old named Jack, and they're absolutely the best. And I get teared up. I just dropped them off at school, and there's just so many activities and so many things. But man, that oxytocin that I get a release of when I get to snuggle them every morning and every night, it's all time. I seriously, when my kids fall asleep, I sit there with this stupid smile on my face going, this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened. It's the most amazing thing ever.
Yeah, kids are the best thing ever. Even when they get big, I still just sit and I'm like, oh, you'll still hug me? Great. I'm gonna hang on forever.
I'll probably be pretty annoying dad that's hugging my daughter all the time and my son all the time. They're like, Dad, seriously, stop. But
and you've got cute kids. And your first spent how many days in the NICU?
So 113 days in the NICU. She was born at 25 weeks and 1 day. We went to the hospital 2 days before that. And my wife had HELP syndrome, which is kind of preeclampsia on steroids. The HELP is high enzymes, low platelets, and I'm missing one other one. All I know is that those initials do not spell joy to me. And so
yeah, they're not helpful at all.
Exactly, no pun intended, right? My wife almost passed away. My daughter almost passed away numerous times, and God, we're just so grateful that she's with us. And we talk all the time about she's such a pistol. She's a lot like her mom that way. And I think that either the good Lord gave her those traits so that she could survive, or he helped her to develop those traits while she was in the NICU. Either way, I see this beautiful and kind and loving, selfless girl on one side, and on the other is this pushy, I can do it, I can make it through anything attitude that's just a bundle of amazing to me. She's so fun.
Yeah, and she's how old right now? She's 6?
She's 6. I just dropped her off at first grade. She's thriving.
Yeah, I think we've talked about what are her kind of long-term impacts, because 25 weeks is so early, but she's doing remarkably.
Well, there's all kinds of things that can happen. I mean, the first thing that you worry about in the NICU is brain bleeds that could lead to all sorts of problems. I mean, there's lots of things that happen. And then, at 60 days, she had too high of potassium levels. And so they gave her a spinal tap. I had to hold her up. I mean, she barely weighs like 3 pounds, and we're giving her a spinal tap, and she's looking at me like I'm this murderous person. That was pretty traumatic to me. And then there's just so many different things as far as the lungs and the eyes and the organs, and so many different things that happen
Yeah.
that it's hard to explain, all the different scares that we had. But I think most people who've had premature babies, they worry about their lungs and asthma and those sorts of things. They worry about their eyes because the oxygen levels, if they're too high, can kind of blow out their retinas. And so far, we've literally had none of those complications. Now, she's kind of not out of the water till she's 8, but signs are looking good. She's a pretty normal height. She's a pretty skinny little girl, but I think she gets that from her mom and her grandma. But we're just so pleased. We're so happy that the miracle of medicine, the miracle of prayer, the miracle of neighbors being so supportive was an amazing experience for us.
A pretty big miracle right there.
Yeah, I remember looking up the statistics. This is really probably not a positive thing to do when you're going through something like that. But I was like, these doctors can't tell us when to deliver our baby. We're the ones that's in charge of that, blah, blah, blah. And I was looking at all these statistics that were like, if she makes it to 26 weeks, it flips it to like 65% chance of survival versus 35. And she was 35%. That's just survival. That's not survival with, all kinds of different things and complications that can happen. And I remember talking to the doctor, and I'm like, I think this is ridiculous. You guys are telling us that we have to deliver our baby. And he's like, Riley, if we don't deliver your baby, your wife dies. And I was like, oh, you didn't tell me that part. So I was humbled very quickly and quickly became a fan of the doctors and nurses and just listened and did everything I could to support the process instead of trying to dictate the process.
Yeah. So when I had my second, I had C-sections with all three for different reasons. And on my second, I was really trying for a VBAC. She just was small and she kind of like wasn't growing. And one day I went to my doctor's appointment and he just said, you know what? I'm going to keep you here today. We're just going to have her. We're going to do a scheduled C-section. And I was like, no, just let me try. Induce me, check me right now. I begged him to do 10 different things and he checked me and all the things. And he finally just said, no, you know what? I'm just wheeling you in for a C-section, like end of story. He's like, I just don't have a good feeling. And that's it. And I was like, okay. And I was totally mad. So we went in, did the C-section. He opened me up and he goes, oh, there she is. And I was like, well, yeah, it's like, shouldn't you be able to see her? Like you just cut me open. And in my mind, even on baby number 2, I did not have the understanding that a uterus was like a thick muscle. I thought that there was just like a clear sac in there that the baby was chilling in. And once that broke, like they just kind of slid out.
Right.
So your uterus is a thick muscle and you should not be able to see through it. Mine, because of my first C-section, around that scar had this window that was stretched. You could see through it like glass. So they call it a window. And he said, this is about to rupture. Had I gone into labor by myself, I would have been living probably at that time, I was in Park City. So I would have been 35 minutes away from the hospital I would deliver at.
Wow.
I was trying to do, a hypnobirth and I would have stayed home for as long as I could. All the things I would have done would have been the worst things possible because I had a uterus that was about to just rip open and we would have had like next to no time to live for either of us. And that moment, probably like the moment when your doctor said, yeah, she's going to die. In that moment, I just felt so small.
Wow.
And not in a bad way. I just felt small and like, you know what? I'm not in charge. I actually had this phrase go through my head was, I hold you in the palm of my hand. Yeah. And I felt like, that was like my message from God, like you think you're in charge, but there's all these things going on, but I've got you. And I just laid there on the table and I was like, I'm so foolish because sometimes we think what we want, is what's best, but often, we have no idea what's best for us.
I've already decided this isn't a good interview for me because you're getting me all choked up.
That's the best part is you're like this big football player. And I think like the big football player, like dudes, you can just get them right in the heart.
I'm the biggest crier there is. I remember feeling almost the exact same thing. I remember, like I said, 2 days before she was delivered, they gave her a steroid shot to kind of help develop Alexa's lungs. I had been there all 24 hours or something like that. And I was like, "Hun, I've got to run home for a second and like get a change of clothes or something." She's like, "Okay, I'll be fine. Just hurry back, you know?" And so I had to run and get some clothes. I had to run over to my mom's house for a minute. And my mom's like, "What are you going to do? This is awful." And I'd had this really, really strong impression and this strong feeling that just basically said, "Riley, no matter what happens, this is going to be a beautiful love story between you and I." And I was prepared in some ways for every situation. Now, maybe that's easy to say because everything turned out beautifully for me, but I remember a very specific moment that I knew that regardless of what happened, that there would be peace and that there would be love and that I would feel, you know, the presence of a greater and divine entity. And so to me, you know, hearing you say that, "You're in the palm of my hand, regardless of what happens, this will be a love story," is impactful, right? It's an interesting feeling.
Riley, I don't mean to skip over also the fact that you have a strapping young man named Jack who is just a little beast. Let's talk about Jack for a minute. Did he have a regular delivery? Like, did he come on time? How'd that all work out?
No, so my kids, apparently we just have to be stressful every time. My wife is obviously high risk pregnancy from now on because of her HELP syndrome. And we were all excited because we made it to 37 weeks, which is kind of the more normal time.
Yeah.
And he proceeded to stop breathing 3 different times after he was born. And so we spent another 15 days in the NICU with him learning how to breathe, and
which is totally unrelated, right?
Had anything to do with HELP syndrome. In fact, we're not even sure why he was having these apnea episodes to this day, right? And so all I know is that when he stopped breathing, that was a healthy blue color that was not comfortable as a father.
Yeah.
You know, I think maybe I just appreciate these kids, and I appreciate everyone's kids because I think there's just so many things that can go wrong in pregnancy, right?
Yeah.
The miracle that is birth is amazing. And I'll tell you this, one thing that happened when Alexis was born and when Jack was born is how many people stepped forward and said, "Oh, we've lost a baby," or "Oh, we had a premature baby." You know, it's just not something that people just talk about and are openly, you know, talking about, "Oh, well, you know, this happened to me and this happened to me and I had this happen and I've lost 3 to miscarriage." And my heart just goes out to so many people. And I think about all the healthy people that are walking around in this world, and there's so many that didn't make it. And it really is a miracle. It's a miracle how many things go right when having a child. It's really amazing.
And I'm going to say something super cheesy, but this morning I was driving my daughter to school, and I don't know why I have all these random thoughts. I was even thinking about what a miracle it is that we have so many different kinds of vegetables. Like, for real, I had like a whole holy moment about vegetables because in the same way, I was just thinking about, I don't even know why I got there. I was probably thinking about pumpkins and zucchinis because it's the fall. And to think about this world we live on and how we evolved to have like so many different kinds of foods and how brilliant it is and how amazing and miraculous that like we could have a butternut squash and a spaghetti squash. Like, what a world we live in. I'm a disaster, but even that seems like such a miracle to me. And then you like fast forward and say, "Oh my gosh, we have all these human bodies running around." That's just insane.
It is. It's just, I don't know. There's just so many things that point to something different for me. And that's just my personal opinion. That's not a judgment on anybody else. That's just how I feel and how I see it. And it really is beautiful when you think of it that way.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
We talk a lot about technology and screen time habits on this podcast. We've been working on the Tech Reset Project, a series of ebooks filled with hands-on conversations, worksheets, resources, and reminders to help you and your family reset your relationship with technology. Our Tech Reset ebook series is coming soon, so I'm posting a link in the show notes so you can sign up for an email alert and an exclusive discount. If you're interested in the book, you can find that link and those details at, of course, todaysmama.com/podcast.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
Tell me about your childhood really fast. Just a quick moment from your childhood. What's the Ratatouille or the sight or the smell or the taste that takes you back to being a kid?
Gal, I mean, there's a few. I've heard a couple, and when I think about my Ratatouille moment, and I think about the different things that have happened to me in my life, I just have this moment of me and my younger brother Casey literally being at a park in Logan, Utah called Lundstrom Park all day. We would bring golf clubs, baseball bats, footballs, and whatever it was, and I can just remember the sight of like my bike being like thrown to the ground as quickly as possible when we got there. And we would play all day. I mean, all day without even thinking about like
Yeah.
checking in with my mom. I'm sure she drove by here and there just to make sure we were still there, right?
Maybe. I mean, Riley, that was like the 80s.
Right. The 80s were like this beautiful, beautiful time. But I think what I remember the most, that's my Ratatouille moment that takes me back to there, is walking through the house, and the first thing is my mom saying, take those clothes off, right? And just literally like taking all of our shoes and everything off, washing our hands, and this beautiful, beautiful aroma of spaghetti and garlic bread and just whatever else. Sometimes if we were lucky that week, we got like some Pepsi and we got to have
Some
that.
Pepsi.
Yeah, like that was like the cool thing. It's crazy just to think about that smell. When my mom makes that meal, it's like I'm in nostalgia moment for sure. Pure happiness if she's making that food. I'll change anything that's going on with my work schedule to go to my mom's house for that dinner right now, just because it reminds me of my childhood. It was such a charmed life, right? To be able to go to the park all day and not worry about anything and come home. And, you think about kids today and they probably get Pepsi every day if they want it. They probably get access to McDonald's or what. I mean, those were like once a month things when I was growing up. If we got Domino's pizza, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, what's the occasion? Something happen? Is there a game on? Is there a big game? Is it the Super Bowl?
Is it my birthday?
Right. And kids are like, you're not taking me to McDonald's today? And I'm like, no, we're not going to McDonald's. I fight over, whether we can go to all these wonderful things that we have and not so wonderful things in some ways, right? Pepsi was a big deal to me. And I think most families have Pepsi like in their fridge, like nonstop.
Just bought from Costco.
Yeah. And I was pretty happy. I mean, I got to go to McDonald's maybe once a month and got a Pepsi here and there. And I was really happy. I was a really happy kid. And I didn't have, any iPhones or iPads, or video games were just barely coming out. I'm kind of on the opposite end of video games. I wasn't really involved in all that, but my younger brother kind of was. So I feel like I was right on the edge of like all this Atari and Nintendo and all these different things that kids had.
And that's why we're in this weird pocket. And you may be a true Gen X, or you may fall into this Zennial stage, which is like between X and millennials, where we had these kind of split childhoods and growing up, where we had so much that was unplugged, but we kind of came of age right at the right time with technology. Not the right time, but as it was, all these things were coming to the market and influencing our lives. So we're in a really interesting boat.
I think that it's been interesting to me what has been a temptation and what hasn't, right? And what has been good for me and what hasn't. I am not tempted at all by video games. I have not fallen into the Fortnite or the Halo or any of those sorts of traps, but I do feel like I'm spending a lot of time trying to figure out ways to manage my phone time. And I think I get tricked into it because, I'm a small business owner.
Yeah.
Much like yourself, where you're trying to promote different products, you're trying to do different things, you're trying to produce good content, and you're trying to get it out there to as many people as you can. And then it's like, oh, well, I'll just look at a few more pictures here after I get done with my Instagram post or my Twitter post or whatever. And so I find myself really limiting my time and making sure that I have certain times of the day that are dead times, because I want to be a good example to my kids. And my kids aren't really, well, I guess they are old enough that we're limiting screen time. I want them to have a healthy relationship with all the wonderful toys that we have, right? I don't want it to be this damaging relationship that changes their lives and changes their brains and all these things. And those are things that I really think about.
Yeah, changes their brains is so big. here's the overwhelming part and the really cool part for any parents listening that are like, oh man, we're too far down the road. I've given my kids too much. There's no going back. Is that, and you probably know this better than anybody, is that the neuroplasticity in their brains is so awesome right now because you can change it and you can help them build new pathways and habits and, kind of get rid of the old ones. And I think we can still do that as adults too. So there's such great opportunities to just like put the brakes on and to try something new with the way that we interact with technology.
I think the biggest mistake that we make as human beings is we think it's too late. I mean, that's just a terrible phrase, right? Like that's terrible self-talk.
Yeah.
And that's what I deal with almost every day is it's never too late to be what you ought to have been, right? I mean, whether it comes to relationships with your kids, whether it comes to parenting your kids, whether it comes to an athlete trying to change some bad habits, you can change. And that's the cool thing. The lie out there is that you can't change or that it's too late. I mean, there's all kinds of evidence out there scientifically that kids forgive phenomenally quick,
yes.
right? That kids are able to change their neural pathways in an incredible fashion. I mean, just think about if you teach a kid how to play the piano or learn a language early in life, they usually play the piano and do things beautifully later in life, just because you expose them to it. But it's not too late to change now. People can learn the piano, people can learn languages later in life as well.
But we do have this really unique opportunity with kids to help them build a really healthy foundation, even if we think we've screwed up to this point, right? And something that's going to stick with them for a really long time.
That's what I was going to say. The caveat to my example is that kids who learn a language at an early age usually speak French a lot better and play the piano a lot better than if we have to make those changes at 21, 25, 29 years old, right? And so as parents, we have this unique opportunity and this unique kind of cool aspect to our lives to expose them to good habits, to expose them to all the wonders of this world that aren't on an electronic screen, right? And so instead of thinking of it in a negative way, I like to think of it as just like, wow, what a cool opportunity I have. I know sometimes I have conversations with my wife and she's like, I'm so worried about my kids and I'm worried about that and I'm worried about all these different things. And I'm like, and isn't it cool that we get a chance to show them the right way? Right? Isn't it an awesome responsibility and a fun thing to show them what a cool thing a hike is up Mill Creek Canyon, right?
Yeah.
Or to show them that it's probably more fun to play catch with this football than to play a video game with a football, right? It just is. And those are magic moments for me when I get my kids to go out and when we get to go do things like those become really, really cool opportunities and cool memories for me and my kids, in my opinion.
Yeah, your kids are lucky. I mean, you've got so much like science in the back of your brain to be like, okay, let's do some things. They're gonna come out of life with you as your dad and your awesome wife with a lot of really cool skills. Because if I'm to like back into, oh, here's why I had Riley on the podcast even, is of course you're my friend, but I knew that you had gone down this kind of sports psychology route. And my son, I thought, you know what, it's worth just a session. My oldest son plays competitive soccer. He doesn't have any huge psychological issues, but he's really hard on himself, right? So when he makes a mistake when he's playing, you can see the momentum of his whole game change because you just watch him like fall almost, even just physically, like his countenance and the way he holds himself and all of that stuff. And I thought, he gets a little anxious. So I'm just going to set up a session with Riley and we're going to go talk through some stuff and see if there's anything helpful in there for him. And do you remember what I did that whole session?
I remember you taking a few notes. And by the way, just for the listeners to know, I do require that the mother comes on the first session. So especially if they're under 18. So she wasn't overbearing. I had asked her to be there.
This is true. But then on the next one, I was like, sorry, Riley, I'm coming back. Because I was getting like a 2-for-1.
I feel like when parents are there, it just opens up a different level of communications. Sometimes with kids, you need to open up a level of communication through a formality. And for some reason, just because I have a degree in it, kids will listen to me for a second, and then it kind of opens up this unique dialogue between parents and kids because they have someone kind of, I don't know, refereeing it or kind of monitoring it so it doesn't get emotional, right? So it just becomes like really, really fantastic. But you did take a lot of notes.
Riley, I took like 4 pages of notes, just mad and crazy, like writing them down because in what you do, I love how it's all through the lens of sports, but the stuff you talk about absolutely has to do with just life and parenting and everything. So, you said a few things to him And I'm just going to recap those, and then I'm going to ask you a little bit about like the mind and performance.
Sure.
First, the thing that my son would do a lot is apologize over and over again. Oh, my bad, my bad, my bad. And the first thing you said to him was, we're done apologizing. Now talk about that, because it doesn't mean that he's like a jerk. It doesn't mean that he actually doesn't apologize to people, but that over apologizing, what does that do to us?
I mean, there's a few different things that go on. And what happens, in his instance is this apology, this constant thinking of I'm the one who messed this up or I'm the one who caused this problem doesn't allow you to think very positive about yourself, and it can lead to a lot of negative self-talk. So, one of the things that I've been doing recently is just saying, hey, instead of saying my bad, I want you to say thank you. And people look at me funny. Like, instead of saying, oh, I'm so sorry I'm late, say thank you for waiting for me. Instead of being all concerned, it's a very, very polite way to just tell someone that, yeah, I'm late.
Yep.
There were some things that came up, but that doesn't reflect on me as a person. That reflects on me on this certain instant right there, right? And so as much as we can, we want to avoid this self-talk. And I'm sure that you've read a lot of Brené Brown, but, I talk about it quite a bit with athletes. The difference between shame and guilt is I made a mistake and I am a mistake. Guilt says I made a mistake. Shame says I am a mistake. It's an anxiety generation. And so when you're constantly apologizing, what they're trying to say is, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I didn't mean to do that, I didn't mean to let you down, I didn't mean to do those things. And we've got to get away from constantly apologizing and kind of just be a little bit more assertive in what we do. It also comes from, and I'm not just talking about your son, but there's kind of this really cool thing in society right now, or what people think is cool, of being just like super agreeable. Being super agreeable is a great thing. Like, yes, we want people to like us, but in some ways, and this was something that I had to work on personally, constantly apologizing or saying, I'm cool with whatever, I'll go to whatever movie, in a really weird way, it doesn't allow people to trust you. And if you think about this for a minute, if you ask me to go to a movie and you're like, what movie do you want to go to? I say, I don't care what movie we go to. That may be very true. That may be something that's true with me personally. It doesn't really matter which movie I go to because I like to hang out with you and your husband and, a bunch of friends. But it doesn't engender trust because they know that I have an opinion. And so what I had to learn to do, and what I teach athletes to do all the time, and this just engenders confidence and trust, is, well, I would prefer to go to the Spider-Man movie, but I'm cool with whatever movie you guys want to go to. And what I found when people ask me to go to restaurants, people ask me to go see a movie or whatever else, is I give my opinion first. And then if it really doesn't matter to me, then I let go of the outcome. And so I become very, very more process-oriented and less outcome-oriented on whether I get to do that or not. I just give my opinion and then I go with the flow.
We can still be flexible, but we can still have something to say.
Exactly. And what it does is it leaves you that room for when you do need to die on that hill, and when something is important to you and you really need to push, that you'll feel more confident to push. No, I need to do this tonight. I can't go with you guys tonight. And everyone's like, oh, well, how come? Well, because of A, B, C, and D. And it allows you to be more confident in yourself just by giving your opinion and then letting go of outcomes. Because there is sometimes where you have to have a strong opinion and you have to stick with your guns and you have to stay within kind of this circle of morals or principles that you've set up for yourself. And when it comes to those times, if you've never given your opinion before, it's a lot harder.
Oh, I love it. Now, the second thing that you told my son, what do you do in that moment right after you've blown it, after you've made that mistake and the self-talk starts to happen in your head? And we talked about win. So tell us what win means.
Yeah, so I use this a lot with athletes. It's what's important now. I actually think that this is an important concept whether we do something great or when we do something bad. So it could be that something really, really disastrous happens. It could be that, your wife calls you on the phone at 24 weeks pregnant and says, the doctor's saying that I need to deliver. When would be a really good thing to repeat to yourself? What's important now? It's also really important if you have a business that's thriving and things are going really, really well, and you've taken a moment to kind of pat yourself on the back. It might be a really, really good refocusing tool to say to yourself, what's important now? Because you need to continue to grow and you need to focus on what is the next most important thing. And in sports, I tell people all the time that the most important play in football is the next play. The most important shot in golf is the next shot, right? The next important ski competition in skiing is the next one. And so we're constantly, if you think about that phrase, what's important now, what it does is it just brings us back to the present. It brings us back to the moment, and it helps us to focus on what we can do right here, right now, to be the best self that we can be, or the best athlete that we can be, or the best mom that we can be, or the best dad that we can be. It's important to get refocused, and the mindfulness techniques that are out there are fantastic. The thinking and the motivation to really move yourself into the present moment is important because, look, no amount of guilt can change the past. No amount of anxiety can change the future. The most important thing that you can take care of is what's going on today, right here and right now. And if we all become just a little bit more focused on today, our tomorrows usually take care of themselves. And, little by little, a little becomes a lot. Just little, small, good decisions every day become great, great decisions over time.
Yep. And it is those little things, because I can make a billion plans for my life. None of them are going to go just as I plan them, right? Like I could have never planned for the life I have today.
And isn't it wonderful? Isn't it cool?
Yeah.
I mean, today's mama is rad. I'm a guy and I read it. I read it. I guarantee you, think about this, Rachel. 18-year-old Rachel thinks that you're pretty freaking cool right now.
Dude, 18-year-old Rachel doesn't even really understand what the internet is.
Right? But once you explained it to her, because she's smart and she's witty and she's ridiculously funny, she would have been like, you did what? This is the coolest thing I've ever heard of. This is like out of this world stuff you're doing, right? Like you're interviewing somebody on your computer. How do you even do that?
Yeah.
I have that thought every once in a while. I mean, if you were to take my life or if you were to go back and interview 18-year-old Riley, you'd be like, oh yeah, he's going to be an attorney. He's going to be working for some big corporation. By the way, he would be miserable and he hates paperwork and he hates all those things that go with being an attorney.
By the way, he hates his life.
Right. And then if he found out that I was dealing in sports psychology and that I was a mental performance coach, he'd be like, that's a thing?
Yeah, like it didn't even exist.
Right. Like 1992 was the first year that they actually came out with a degree in what I do. And that was my senior year in high school. It was really, really new. And I don't know. I just think about how cool our lives are and how cool and blessed we are to be where we're at. And 95% of the time, they're not anywhere close to what we dreamed them up to be. Not even close.
Yeah, I couldn't have written a business plan to do this or to follow that path. And same thing with I think when I was in high school, I looked at adults and I thought, oh my gosh, that looks so lame. They all look so unhappy. And like being a grown-up has been a whole lot more fun than I ever anticipated. Don't get me wrong, there's hard things, Riley. Both you and I have done some really hard things.
Sure.
But life is just really beautiful, is what it is. I sound like a Hallmark card right now. Riley, life is really beautiful.
This whole interview has been a little bit hallmarky, but I think that was what kind of cool about our relationship, even from working way back during the Olympics, is that we were able to share things heart to heart. And I think that was kind of fun for me to see that there's people that were comfortable with that, right?
For sure.
I don't know. I think about this world and I think about all the different things that have happened to me. I think the lesson that I'm learning as an adult is that I'm the captain of my ship. Like I literally do make decisions every single day that decide whether I'm going to be happy or unhappy. And that I make decisions that can make other people happy or unhappy. And that my individual choices and my individual ability to make good choices has an effect not just on my family, but on this world. I mean, it really does. And I think that's a fun message. That's a fun thought, to think that there really is much more control over our lives than we think there is.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
Every time we release an episode, we put features up on todaysmama.com to go with it. This week, we've got a guest post from Riley all about reframing. I've also got a post up that talks a bit more about my experience with my VBAC attempt and the near disaster that accompanied me. And you can also find features from past episodes. There's a green Jell-O salad recipe, the raspberry pretzel Jell-O salad recipe, and so many more good things that aren't Jell-O salad recipes. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You can find all that info and more in the show notes, which you can find at todaysmama.com/podcast. Enjoy.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
Well, and let's talk about that for a minute, because it's that mindset, right? There's an element of having the right mindset to, make those real world results happen and to build a happy life. So let's talk about the psychological impact of our brain and our mind on the results we get or how we perform or what happens for us, right? Because there's a whole mental game that's going inside our head that actually ends up impacting the way we function, behave, and perform. So it's a long way of setting up this question, but what's the most important thing, the most important factor for us, for our mind and our brains when it comes to performing or getting the results we want?
Well, I think one of the things that's just really easy to talk about is kind of letting go of outcomes and focusing on processes. And a lot of times we get these big grandiose goals and we're like, how am I, we set up this big goal, like, maybe to own something like Today's Mama, or to have a consulting firm that consults not only athletes and professional athletes, but corporate athletes and corporate coaches, whatever it is that you do. And sometimes we look at that and we've bitten off this huge piece and we're like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to do that? How am I ever going to be able to eat this elephant, right? And the answer is one bite at a time. The more that we can take a huge, gigantic goal and kind of divide it up into bite-sized pieces, or I say with athletes all the time, like, that's awesome. I am so glad that you want to be a World Cup and an Olympian performer. What are you going to do today? What are you going to do today to get there? And we've got to work backwards from those large and grandiose goals, because those are the small moments that I'm talking about. We can win and we can succeed on a high level when we have a certain level of competence, right? But we have to do the daily work. We have to be able to put in the work every single day, or to be able to divide it up so that we know that the work what we're doing each day is going to get us to our goal. I mean, I remember talking to you not very long ago about a podcast, and then it was like minutes and you had figured it all out, and you're doing these professional podcasts that are amazing to listen to, and I love them, right? But at some point you had thought about it. At some point you had kind of broken it down into pieces and you're like, okay, well, here's what I need to do today to be able to get my podcast up. And here's who the people are that I want to interview. It didn't all happen in one day, even though it kind of feels like it to me.
And just so you know, it was probably more like a year-long process of thinking about it, mapping it out, thinking about it some more. I think Tim Ferriss in one of his podcasts he said this about writing a book. If you just want to write a book and be an author, you probably shouldn't. But if it's the thing that won't leave your brain, if it has to exit your body, if it has to be said, spoken, it has to get out of you, then you should do it. And that's what a podcast was for me. Is there were so many conversations I wanted to have. I was constantly staging interviews in my head. It was just, I had to get it out of my body.
And it's been awesome, and it benefits all of us. And so it's a beautiful thing. I think the other thing that I would say, besides breaking things down into these bite-sized pieces that we can manage and that we can handle, is that, there's this thing, and I don't want to get too geeked out on the science of everything, but there's this thing called the myelin sheath, right? It's this fatty white substance that wraps around our neurons to help us to fire them more quickly and more efficiently. Some athletes call it muscle memory. Other people just call it, the myelin sheath. But what it is it's this constant thought process that we have, that we react to stimulus that happens every day. And we have a great control over the reaction that takes place to things. And those reactions build this myelin sheath, or this muscle memory, or this memory in our mind of what we do when we handle stressful moments, or what we do when we handle good moments, or how we're going to handle it. And the more myelin sheath you have, the better you get and the more efficient you get at that action or whatever it is. So for example, Albert Einstein donated his brain. He had 25% more myelin sheath in the science and math portion of his brain. There's another football player by the name of Junior Seau who had something like 33% more myelin sheath in his motor skill portion of his brain, meaning running, jumping, doing things like that, right? So it's interesting that this myelin sheath can be particularly impactful to us so that we can make good habits and keep good habits, if that makes sense. And so focusing on those daily goals, those daily things that make us good every single day, such as making your bed, getting up getting some exercise, maybe reading scriptures, maybe practicing meditation, maybe saying prayer, whatever it is that is your thing, those are great builders of your myelin sheath, and they make you super healthy so that when bad times happen and when bad things happen, that you could just go into automatic pilot and still succeed in a lot of ways. And so I think it's fascinating to me when I get geeked up about these things, that as we build these good habits and as we make these million small decisions, that they become kind of cemented in our brains and kind of built into our minds so that we can succeed. But I think the scary thing about all of this thing that I just talked about is that it can also happen in a negative way. It's like, I had a friend a long time ago who got a divorce, and I'm like, what do you think happened? And he just told me, he's like, it was a million small moments. And I think that's true for things that are negative that happen to us. And I think that's true for things that are positive that happen to us. And we've got to try as hard as we can to be the captain of our own ships, to be in charge of our own lives, so that those million small moments are a million small good decisions and not a million small bad decisions.
So to get there, if you were like Santa Claus, and you've got a bag of all these like tools and tricks, right? Like little gifts for people. If you could give anyone a mental performance gift, the thing that you think would be the most impactful, or make the biggest difference, what would that little gift be?
Look, I think that no matter what we're doing, whatever endeavor that we've embraced, it's just super important that our self-talk is in line with what we're trying to do. And it's interesting because there's a book called What to Say When You Talk to Yourself that indicates that 77% of our self-talk is negative or counterproductive. And counterproductive, basically, the easiest way for me to explain that is that it becomes an excuse. Like an excuse that I used to use was, well, my dad's not as connected as some of these other dads, so I didn't get that opportunity, right? That like gets me off the hook, but that's negative or counterproductive to like what I'm trying to do. And so the tool or the gift that I would give to anyone is the ability to understand that you can fight your own self-talk. So let me give you an example. The next time you get a case of the I can'ts or the I don'ts, I'm just not a good mom, right? Or I'm just not good at this, or I'm just not good at that. After you say that negative phrase to yourself, use the phrase, that's not true. And then give yourself a phrase that counteracts that. It's called a counter argument. I call it a counter punch to this negative self-talk that comes into your mind. So if I'm giving a live example, it'd be, Kyle, Riley, this interview, you've just really, really struggled today. And then I would say to myself, that's not necessarily true. You came up with a whole bunch of really good points, and you were really authentic about your kids, and you're authentic about your relationship with Rachel. And I think this could be a beneficial interview for somebody who's out there and listening, right? But it has to be real and it has to be genuine, the argument that I'm making. And so I guess the advice that I would give is talk back to yourself. When those negative thoughts come into your head, talk back like a mother. Talk back like you did talking back to your mom and dad for the first time. And it kind of felt good, but it kind of felt scary at the same time. Like just talk back to yourself, because that's a very, very healthy and great thing to do. And then I think just as a side note to that, Viktor Frankl is one of my favorite reads, Man's Search for Happiness. And he talks about this in his book in kind of a different way, but we use it in sports psychology all the time. And that's the phrase E plus R equals O. The event plus your reaction equals your outcome. And the only thing that you have control over is your reaction.
Yep.
It's the only thing that you have control over. And if Viktor Frankl can do it in Auschwitz, in the most outlandish and ridiculous and crazy situation that has ever existed on this earth, if he could find the joy and if he could find the time to react in a positive and uplifting way in Auschwitz, so can we. So can we. And no matter how bad it is, no matter how desperate it feels, and no matter how difficult it feels out there for your situation, you do have control over your reaction. And I think that's impactful and powerful to athletes, to parents, to business people, and really just to human beings all around the world.
Drop the mic, Riley. That was so good. I've got to follow that up with something else you said to my son, which was the word yet. I'm not good at that yet. I didn't make a goal yet. Yeah.
You are good at it.
See, and
You're
I
doing
throw this at my kids
fantastic.
all the time because as parents, this is one of the easiest things we can do to plant that seed and make your kids and ourselves exercise that little muscle, right? When they come in and they say the bad thing that happened or what they didn't do well, and you end it with yet, the whole energy around that thing changes. When you just say, yeah, I didn't score a goal yet. Like that implies that like I got good things coming.
Well, and the thing that I love about Yet, and this comes from Carol Dweck. She's a neuropsychologist at Stanford, and she wrote a wonderful book, by the way, called Mindset. That's just a fantastic book for anyone to read, especially if your kids are involved in sports. But it comes from the sense that it's literally like calling timeout in the middle of a game and adding time to the clock,
Yeah.
right? Like, okay, I didn't score a goal. Timeout. Yet I'm going to need you to put 30 more minutes on the clock because I have more time. Because the truth is, we do have more time. Like, this isn't the last chapter in our book. This isn't the last episode that we're ever going to have in our lives. And when you use the word yet, it buys you more time. It gives you more time to grow and to progress and to kind of just become the person that you want to be. Yeah, I'm not the starting quarterback for varsity yet. It's true, you're not yet, right? And then when that clock ends, then a new dream begins and you can start a new dream and you can try and figure something out.
I think there's sunshine behind that word because there's a lot of stuff we carry with us that has a cloud over. But when you throw the word yet out, it's just like little rays of sunshine pop out.
Yeah, it's like, I'm just not good at math. Well, not yet, but we're working on it together, right? And it's a great empowering phrase for parents to use with their kids. I mean, it's just fantastic. And I don't know. I get so excited about this stuff because I've seen it with my own kids, right? Like just rewarding bravery and courage as much as I can, like making losses into wins everywhere I can. I mean, it just becomes impactful and it's beautiful. And I think it's the way it's supposed to be. I think it's the way that we can encourage others. It's the way that we encourage ourselves to continue to be resilient and to be able to do the things that we're trying to do.
So, Riley, I'm going to read your favorite quote back to you because I think it ties together a lot of what we've talked about, but I think it also is probably one of the drivers behind what you do. But here it is. To each there comes in their lifetime a special moment when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing, unique to them and fitted to their talents. What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared or unqualified for that which could have been their finest hour.
Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? To think to ourselves, there is a divine destiny, that there is something for us out there that we can do that maybe nobody else can do. And, you know, the sad part of it that Winston Churchill brings up there is that what a terrible thing if we aren't prepared for it. So to me, I guess if we could wrap up an interview in a bow in that quote, it's that the lesson there is work while you wait, hustle while you wait. I did not discover that this was going to be the job for me and the exciting thing that I wanted to do in my life until I was 40 years old. I was 40 years old, but I was working. I was in sales. I was doing different things. I was coaching football. I was trying to make an impact on people's lives in the best way that I knew how. And the only thing that I can say is that I was hustling while I waited for my destiny. I was working while I waited for my chance to do what I think I was born to do now. And that's to impact young athletes and professional athletes' lives through some positivity, through some psychology, and through some mental coaching that can be impactful. But man, what a cool thing that I was working and gaining all these skills and experiencing all these things before I figured it out. Because I think all of those things that led up to this moment have been particularly impactful to any successes that I could have or will have. The ability to not be scared of talking to people from my sales career is awesome. The fact that I played college sports and high school sports and just about every sport you can imagine leading up to this was impactful and helped me. And so this has just been a really fun journey. I'm super grateful that I've been on, today's mama. I hope that this podcast has been a little bit uplifting and a little bit impactful to those that are listening, because it really is a good life. I mean, we talk so much about social media and all the negatives that are out there, but never before in the history of this world has there been more positive things out there, including your podcast, including different websites and different podcasts that are out there that can put positivity into our mind and help us to see things as they ought to be and kind of chase those dreams. I love this world. I love all the information that's at our fingertips.
Now, if people want to follow up with you online or follow you on social media or anywhere, where should people go look to find you to keep filling this goodness that we have felt today, Riley?
Well, I think it's on Today's Mama, right? Isn't there a link on Today's Mama?
I will have a link on Today's Mama, but like on
Okay.
Instagram, what are all your IDs?
For the most part, if you just remember Riley Jensen Consulting, so RileyJensenConsulting.com. On Instagram, it's Riley Jensen Consulting, and on Twitter, it's just Riley Jensen. And then on iTunes and SoundCloud, you can look up the Mindset Matters podcast. And usually I do just about 5 minutes a day on some sort of a mental coaching aspect so that you can get your day started off correctly.
Yep, and we love it. And my son loves it. He listens all the time. So
Dynamic kid, by the way. He's dynamic.
he's a really good kid, huh?
He is.
Speaking of the word yet, we were talking about something the other day, and I was like, oh, have you kissed her? Because, he's in high school. He's all, not yet. He was throwing his positive mindset out there.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
All right. Well, let's catch up again soon. And thank you for being here today.
Anytime, Rachel. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the good that you're doing with Today's Mama. I tell so many people about your website. It's not even funny. So
it's because you're too good to me, Riley. You're a sweet little angel.
I don't know. You're just one of those, you're one of those friends that I just keep going back to and going, God, she's cool. Man, she's cool. She's so fun to be around. So anyway.
Whatever, Riley, we know you're where the party's at. So, but thank you for all the kind words. You are selling me well, and I'm going to have you back on the show for that. So it's been such a fun interview, Riley. Let's catch up again soon.
Thank you.
I've got your friendly reminder to look down at the app you're listening on and give us all the stars and likes and love you can possibly muster. Be sure to subscribe on whatever app you're listening on. And remember, you can also subscribe via email at todaysmama.com/podcast. You can also access each episode's show notes at todaysmama.com/podcast. Each episode is numbered and titled with the guest name. Super easy. Catch you next time.
You've been listening to the Today's Mama podcast with Rachel Hersher. To find out more, go to todaysmama.com. That's today's, MAMA.com. Today's Mama, connecting moms and families with the best of today.